On a map printed in Rome in 1591, there is a kingdom, a capital city drawn with little towers, provinces each carrying their own name, rivers traced in the same careful ink the mapmaker used for Spain, for Portugal, for the kingdoms of Europe. The kingdom is called Congo. It's real. Its king wrote letters to the Pope. Now find a map of that same stretch of African coast 300 years later. Where the kingdom stood, there's a blank, and the word someone printed across the blank is Unexplored. I want to start with something smaller than a map, a single letter. In 1526, a king sat down in his palace and wrote to another king. He wrote in Portuguese, in a formal court hand, through his own royal secretary. And he addressed the King of Portugal, not as a subject and not as a curiosity, but as one monarch writing to another. The letter is a complaint. He's writing to say that foreign merchants are coming into his country and taking his people, seizing men and women, sometimes the sons of noble families, and carrying them away across the ocean. He says his country is being emptied. He asks directly for it to stop. That king was named Afonso I. His kingdom was called Congo, and the letter still exists. You can read it. It sits in an archive in Portugal, nearly 500 years old, written by a Catholic African king who could see in real time something being done to his kingdom that he did not yet have a word for. Here's what took me the longest to get my head around while I was putting this together. This wasn't a chief making a mark on a treaty he couldn't read. This was a literate Christian monarch running a state with a capital city, a court, and ambassadors, corresponding with Lisbon and with Rome in their own language for generations. Europe knew exactly who he was. Europe drew his kingdom on its maps. And then, over the next few centuries, that same Europe slowly rubbed the whole thing out until the place where his kingdom stood became a blank marked unknown. And the version of history that reached most of us skipped him entirely. So the question I kept circling is a simple one. How do you lose a country that people were writing letters to? Let me lay out what was actually there, because most of us were never told any of it. The Kingdom of Kongo sat on the west coast of Central Africa, around the mouth of the Congo River, in what today is northern Angola, and the western edge of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It had existed as an organized kingdom since roughly the end of the 1300s, more than a century before any European laid eyes on it. Its capital was a city called Mbanza Kongo, up on a high plateau. And this was not a village. By some estimates, the kingdom held 3 to 4 million people, spread across 6 provinces, each with its own name and its own governor. In 1482, a Portuguese captain named Diogo Cão reached the river mouth and made contact. And what happened next is not the story we're used to hearing about Europe and Africa. There was no immediate conquest. There was an exchange of envoys. Within a few years, the King of Congo had converted to Christianity, baptized in 1491 as João I. His son, Afonso, went further and built something genuinely new, a Christian African kingdom that dealt with Portugal as a partner and a peer. And here's the moment I keep coming back to, because it still sounds impossible even after you've verified it. Afonso sent his own son, Henrique, to be educated in Europe. And in 1518, the Pope in Rome agreed to make that young man a bishop. The first bishop from Sub-Saharan Africa in the entire history of the Catholic Church. A prince of Congo, consecrated in Rome 500 years ago. Sit with that for a second, because it's the exact opposite of the picture most of us were handed. The capital was renamed São Salvador. There were stone churches, There was a court that kept written records. There were ambassadors from Congo living in Lisbon and later in Rome. And this is why we can be so certain the kingdom was real and not some later romantic invention. Europe documented it obsessively. In 1591, an Italian named Filippo Pigafetta published a whole book describing the Kingdom of Kongo, based on the account of a Portuguese trader who had lived there for years, complete with a detailed map. On a map like that, Congo isn't a rumor at the edge of the world. It's a labeled kingdom with named provinces, sitting on the page with the same weight as any European state. There's even a memorial bust, still in one of the great churches of Rome, of a Congo ambassador named António, who died in the city in 1608 while representing his king to the Vatican. For something like 200 years, that was the reality. A kingdom that Europe corresponded with, prayed alongside, argued with, drew, and sent its envoys to. And then it started to come apart. There was no single day the Kingdom of Kongo vanished. That's the first thing that surprised me. If you go looking for the dramatic ending, the burned city, the final battle, the last king marched off in chains, you don't quite find it. What you find instead is slower and stranger, and I think worse. The pressure Afonso described in his letter didn't stop, it grew. The same Atlantic trade that had begun as an exchange between two kingdoms turned into something enormous and one-directional. A machine that ran on human beings, pulling people out of West Central Africa by the hundreds of thousands, and then the millions over the centuries that followed. A kingdom being steadily drained of its own people cannot stay strong forever. In 1665, a Portuguese-led force met the army of Congo at a place called Mbuila and killed the king on the field. The kingdom didn't disappear after that, but it fractured into rival factions, into decades of civil war, into a shrinking authority that limped on as a shadow of itself. Portugal finally formally abolished the monarchy in 1914 after crushing a revolt. But that's the political story. And it's not really the part this video is about. A kingdom losing its power is ordinary. That happens all the time. What I actually wanted to understand was how Congo lost its place on the map. Because that's not the same thing as losing its throne, and it didn't happen at the same time. Most of us grew up with a particular picture of Africa's history, even if we never said it out loud. The picture is this, that the interior of Africa was unknown, mysterious, unmapped, a dark continent, until brave European explorers, men like Livingstone and Stanley, pushed inland in the 1800s and, for the first time, discovered what was there. The blank spaces on the map finally filled in. I need to be careful here, because that story isn't so much a lie as a reversal. And the reversal is the whole point. Africa's interior wasn't a blank that explorers filled in. Large parts of it were a blank that had been emptied out. Europe knew where Congo was in 1550. It had the maps, it had priests living in the capital, and ambassadors going back and forth. The knowledge existed in detail, in print, in Lisbon and Rome. So when a 19th century map of that exact same coastline shows the interior as empty and stamps the word unexplored across it, that word isn't describing ignorance, it's describing forgetting. Somewhere between the map of 1591 and the map of 1850, the kingdom didn't just fall, it got left out. Each new generation of mapmakers copied a little less of it forward until there was almost nothing left to copy, and the blank became the official truth. That's the detail worth sitting with. The Dark Continent was not a place Europe had never seen. It was, in part, a place Europe had seen clearly, written down, and then chosen to stop remembering. So what actually does the erasing? The easy answer: the one that gets a lot of views on channels a little less careful than I'm trying to be here, is that someone did it on purpose. That there was a decision, an order, a room where powerful men agreed to wipe Congo off the record. And I looked for that. I genuinely looked. I couldn't find it. And I've come to think that looking for it is a mistake, because the truth is heavier than a conspiracy. Nobody had to burn the maps. Think about what the Atlantic trade needed to be true. A kingdom whose prince had been made a bishop in Rome, whose king signed his letters to you as an equal. That is an extraordinarily inconvenient thing to be shipping people out of by the millions. It becomes much easier, morally and legally, and inside your own head, if the place those people come from isn't a kingdom at all, but just an empty, dark, formless stretch of coast with nothing on it worth naming. So the blank space on the map and the trade in human beings were never really two separate facts. The blank was useful. It let a continent be treated as raw material. And then, at a conference table in Berlin in 1884, it let that same continent be divided up between European powers, with straight lines drawn through territory those powers described to each other as unclaimed. None of that required a villain hunched over a candle burning documents. It required something much more ordinary, thousands of small choices by mapmakers and merchants and clerks, each one leaving out a little more, each one perfectly reasonable on its own, all of them pointing the same direction, and none of them ever written down as a plan. That's the part that unsettles me more than any conspiracy would. This is what it looks like when a memory isn't destroyed, but simply allowed to lapse by a lot of people who each had a small reason to let it go. Which brings me back to Afonso and his letter in 1526. Because the thing about that letter, the thing I can't quite shake, is that he saw it, not the maps. He couldn't have known about those, but he saw the beginning. He wrote to Lisbon to say his country was being emptied, that his people were being taken, that something was happening to his kingdom that would not stop. He was, in the most literal sense, documenting his own erasure while it was still just starting. He wrote it down. He filed it. He sent it across an ocean to the one court he thought might listen. And here's the quiet, awful irony of it. That letter is one of the reasons we can prove Congo existed at all. It survived, not because anyone in Europe was trying to preserve the memory of his kingdom, but almost by accident, sitting in a filing system, outliving the very thing it described. One piece of paper, written by a worried king, ended up lasting longer than his country's place on the map. So when you look at one of those later maps, the ones with the confident blank and the word Unexplored, I'd ask you to see it a little differently now. That blank isn't an empty space. It's a full one that got erased. There was a city there, and a court, and churches, and a king who wrote letters. The emptiness on the map isn't the absence of a place. It's the absence of a memory, printed as if it were a fact. I spent a long time on this one, and I want to be straight about where it leaves me, because it isn't anywhere comfortable. We can reconstruct Congo. We got lucky. There were letters, there were books, there was a bust in a church in Rome. There was a king literate enough and worried enough to write things down. The paper trail survived, so this particular erasure we can partly reverse, but that's exactly what bothers me. Congo made it back into the story almost by chance because of a handful of documents that happened not to be thrown away. And if a Christian kingdom that sent an ambassador to the Pope and corresponded with European courts for 200 years could still slide off the map and out of the school books, could nearly vanish and only come back because of a few surviving letters, then how many other names were sitting on those older maps in that same confident ink that nobody thought to write a letter about? How many of those blanks aren't empty at all? And of all the places we've been told were simply never there, Which one just never had an Afonso to leave the evidence behind?